some of the more confusing things about our hobby are coin grades, because when you first encounter it and you're first seeing these for the first time, you'll encounter words like good, but good doesn't really mean good, and very good definitely doesn't mean very good. In fact, even uncirculated doesn't really mean uncirculated. So it's not surprising that coin grades and coin grading can be a little bit confusing to people who are experiencing it for the first time. Welcome to the World of Coin Collecting Volume 4. This coin grades and coin grading video will be an introduction to the idea of coin grading and how it can apply to you and how it can really benefit you if you start to understand exactly what it means. My name is White Cross. For those not familiar with the channel, I appreciate you being with me here today on this journey. Volume 4 of this series. If you haven't watched the rest of the videos in this series, I encourage you to go back and take a look at it and subscribe to the channel so you can see more content like this if you are one of my returning subscribers. Thank you guys, as always, for being here. It means so much to me that you keep on coming back for this, and it makes me want to keep on making videos just like this. So, coin grades and coin grading. I want to give you a couple of words that we can think about. Those who are familiar with the channel know that I like to kind of work in a couple of concepts at the beginning of the video that we can work back into the content of the video a little bit later on. A couple of them in this instance. The first one is superlative. It's a fancy word, but really what it means is that there are adjectives and adverbs that show a thing or action has a little bit more of the quality than others of the similar type. So when you're looking for something really nice, you're going to be looking for those superlatives. You're going to be looking for those examples that display that which you are after to a better or higher degree than the rest of the pieces within that population. Superlative. That's really all it means. And the other one is something that we encounter on a day-to-day basis, but maybe a little bit of a refresher wouldn't be a bad idea, and that's the idea of subjective versus objective. Subjective just means that something is based on a personal feeling or preference. It's kind of an opinion. Subjective. In my opinion, I believe that this coin is better than this coin. It's not really based on anything other than your opinion. Subjective. Objective is not influenced by personal feelings or opinions. It is unbiased or verifiable with facts. There is no doubt that this piece is much more worn than this piece. That is an objective observation, and it's something that is indisputable. Objective versus subjective. We'll talk about that in superlative a little bit later in this video, but really, this video is just designed to give you kind of an overview of the concept of coin grading, kind of take some of the mystery out of it so you're a little bit more comfortable with it as you go on your journey into physical precious metals and numismatics. And if you're new to the channel, I also like to begin each of my videos with a simple disclaimer. I'm not a financial advisor. I'm not trying to offer any kind of financial advice. I'm simply trying to share some of my experience having bought and sold coins and precious metals for the last 30 or 40 years. So the world of coin collecting, coin grades, and coin grading, it really starts with a man named William Sheldon, and he was born in 1898, died in 1977. We'll talk about him in just a moment, but I want to kind of give you a scenario to think about. Let's say that you are a merchant in New York or Boston in the United States of America in about 1820. So this is kind of post-federal period. The Revolutionary War is kind of a distant memory, something that your grandparents probably talk about. But you're a tobacco merchant, and you're a pretty successful merchant. For the first time, you're able to actually start putting a little bit of money aside. You and your fellow merchant class actually have savings. You're trying to better yourself financially, and you're actually making enough money that you don't just have to spend every single cent that you make on food and shelter and clothing. You actually are able to start putting money aside. So let's say that you take payment one day for your bundle of tobacco, and one of the coins that comes into you is an interesting coin that you've never seen before, a 1793 dated cent. Copper coin, just a cent. Now, cents used to be considerably larger than they are now. We actually refer to them now as large cents, but you wouldn't have. You would have just known this to be a cent, but you've never seen this one before. 1793 dated, and it has a chain on the back of it. Interesting. you have started to assemble a coin collection. You put some coins aside, and you aren't just taking the average run-of-the-mill pieces out of circulation. You have the ability to take some money and put it aside. Why not make it a little bit more interesting? So you see this 1793 dated coin. It's 25, 30 years old. You've never seen it before. So you put it aside, you put it in your pocket, you take it home, and you put it in your strong box that you keep hidden under your bed at night. And you are at, let's say there's a gentleman's club where you go with several other of your merchant class fellow purveyors of fine goods in Boston or New York. On Friday nights, you have a cigar or you smoke some of your own best tobacco, and you have a glass of brandy or sherry, and you talk about being a merchant and how exciting it is and how you're starting to acquire some wealth with some of the guys that do the same thing that you do. And you're always seated across the table from the Commodore. And the Commodore likes to brag about everything he has. And one day he actually sits down, starts smoking a cigar right in front of you, even though he knows that you're a purveyor of tobacco yourself. And he pulls out a coin just like yours. And he throws it on the table and says, "Gentlemen, I found this coin and I think it's really interesting. You'll probably never see another one like this." Now, what he's found and what you have found is a 1793 chain cent. This is a very scarce early American copper coin. They only made about 38,000 of them. First time you had seen one was a few days before. The Commodore had seen one, put it in his pocket, and was going to brag about it when he got to the gentleman's club a little bit later in the day. And you, for the first time in your life, while the Commodore is sitting across from you with a smug smile of satisfaction on his face, pull out your own 1793 dated large cent with the chain around the back, and you toss it on the table and say, "I found one of those earlier this week too, but Commodore, correct me if I'm wrong, I believe my piece is in slightly better condition than yours." And for the first time ever, you see the Commodore's smile fade as he realizes that you've outdone him. Your coin is objectively better than his coin. You have more detail left on your coin. Your coin is a higher grade than his coin. And that's probably how coin grading really began. You needed people who had enough money to put coins aside. They didn't just have to spend every single penny that they got. And once we got into merchant classes, where you didn't have to be royalty or a king or a queen to save money and start your own coin cabinet, those merchant class people who actually had enough money to set aside probably started comparing pieces. Is this piece interesting? Is this something I've never seen before? And if I have the option of taking one example out of the 3 or 4 that I got paid with today, which one am I going to choose? I'm going to choose the one that has the best eye appeal and probably the best detail still in existence on that coin. You have selected a coin based on grades. So grading, like I said, really began with a man named William Sheldon, who decided to kind of codify this whole idea of which piece looks better than the other piece. So if you want to just look at things again objectively, this you can see is a very well coin, but it also has the outline of an eagle on it. You can see here, this is the eagle's wing raised, and there are some devices down below that look suspiciously like arrows. If you are a Morgan dollar collector, you immediately recognize this silhouette as being the backside of a Morgan dollar, but it is so worn that you can barely make it out. This is the same coin in much better condition. You see the comparison between the two? The one on the right was one that probably never genuinely circulated. In fact, it almost certainly didn't. The one on the left saw a lot of circulation. In fact, this was probably somebody's pocket piece. That means something that they kept in their pocket kind of as a good luck token. But this is coin grading. So Sheldon took the idea that had probably already been in existence, people deciding that one coin is less good condition than the next coin, and he codified it. He put it into a code, and what he was originally trying to do was to kind of differentiate the values of coins. And he too, like your example of the merchant back in 1820 or in Boston or New York, was most interested in copper coins, early American copper coins. In fact, he was primarily interested in those 1793, familiar date, that's the date of that chain cent we were talking about. all the way up until about 1814. Those were the pieces that he was most fascinated with. So before he became a famous doctor of psychology, and apparently also eugenics, a field that he probably shouldn't have been messing around with, when he was a younger man, he was kind of codifying which pieces cost more in relation to others. And that's really how the Sheldon grading scale began. We use the Sheldon grading scale to this day. Simply put, it is a scale of 1 to 70, with 1 being almost unimaginably bad and 70 being almost unimaginably good. And the way he got to those numbered increments was simply multiples of value, multiples of worth. So he started with the idea of coins being in something that he called the basal state. And this would be an example of a coin that would be basal. It is so well worn that only somebody with a little bit of experience can even really tell what this is. We can tell, and you can see the vague shadow of an outline of Liberty's face on the obverse, or the front of the coin, that this is a Morgan dollar. And somebody with a little bit better understanding of the very specific details of these coins would probably even be able to give it a date. The date is down here. You can't even make it out. So this would be probably a 1 on Dr. Sheldon's scale of 1 to 70. So he determined how much this piece was worth, and then he set increments for what the next levels were worth in terms of multiples of that worth. For example, if this one was a basal state, a 1, and it was worth, let's say, theoretically $5, what would something that was worth $4 look, or 4 times that amount look like? And he decided to call that a good coin. So he decided to assign both verbal or written descriptors and numeric descriptors to them. This was basal state 1. And then the next step up, he would say maybe this was worth 4 times as much, because you can start to really see the eagle's outline here. Again, those arrows we talked about. You've got Liberty's face here. That's pretty discernible. So maybe this was worth 4 times as much. And he designed something that was worth 4 times as much. He designated it as being good. That was his descriptor, 4 times the value. And he kept on going that way. A very good example, he decided, was 8 times the value of the first one. So this one became associated with the number 8. Fine example. At this point, you can really start to see the details very well. You can see Liberty's face quite well. You can even read the date very easily. So maybe this was a fine example. This is worth 12 times what this piece was worth. And he continued on with that process until he had about 22 different grades and different numeric representations of those grades. And they're really all based on multiples of value. So he set kind of a very specific chain of events in place where he was trying to detail exactly how much pieces could be worth, because that's really how he was making his living. He was grading coins for some of the larger coin dealers in the area. And he decided that the calculations and equations that he was using would allow him to get multiples up to theoretically 70 times the value from this piece to this piece. So that's really all the Sheldon scale is a series of multipliers of value of coins. And when he first set up doing this, he really only used about 22 specific grades. Remember, I said the Sheldon scale is 1 to 70. But he didn't use 1-point increments all the way down the line. He just used about 22 ideas, 22 of those stopping points on that continuum, if you will, and he gave them all individual names. Now, the words that he used to describe those numeric stopping points don't make a lot of sense to people outside of the coin field. And they go something like this. His basal state, we would call this poor. That makes sense. It's in poor condition. It's a 1. But then the next step he said would be somewhere around a 3 times the multiplier. And he called that about good. I guess that kind of makes sense to call 3 on the scale of 1 to 7 about good. The problem is that the next piece up, he's going to call a 4 or a 5, and he's going to call that a good. And if we talk to somebody outside of the numismatic community, out of the coin collecting community, and talk about a piece being in good condition, we would think that that piece was pretty nice, right? Good condition to people outside of our community when you're not using the Sheldon scale sounds like something is pretty nice condition. Unfortunately, within the coin community, good actually means pretty bad. Most coin collectors don't seek for things in good condition on that Sheldon scale of 1 to 70, somewhere around 4. We would consider that probably too low to collect unless it was a very scarce issue, a very rare older issue that got lots of wear. Incidentally, those 1793 chain cents, great examples of those. Continuing on the line, very good, he called that an 8. Fine condition, a 12. Now, to me, fine sounds worse than good, but the way that Sheldon put these numbers or these phrases in place, sometimes it's a word, sometimes it's a couple of words, that is what he called something that was worth 12 times the basal state. That was fine condition. And then he went with very fine at 20. He went with extremely fine or extra fine, depending on how old school you are, at 40. And then he finally gets up to about uncirculated at 50. And I think that in our representation here, this is probably an about uncirculated 50 coin. And I'm not going to go into great detail, no pun intended, about what we're looking at when we're talking about coin grading. But typically, we're looking at the highest points of a coin. If you consider a coin kind of laying flat on its edge, there are places that are higher relief, that stand up more from the fields. And in the case of the Morgan dollar, that tends to be right around the eagle's head and the eagle's breast here. There are a couple other points on the back. We call that the reverse. But those are really the places you're talking about. On the obverse, or the front, you're talking about around Liberty's eyes. This is the top of her pileus cap here. That gets a little bit of extra wear. The hair right around her ear, as you see here, tends to get wear. And these are tobacco and cotton leaves and flowers here in her kind of crown. And those tend to get wear also. The Morgan dollar is a great example of fields here because these fields, these wide planes here on either side of her face, tend to pick up bag marks. When these coins were originally minted, they were thrown into canvas sacks of 1,000, and they were thrown around and lumped around, and they bumped into each other. Those bag marks do impact grade to an extent, but they aren't technically part of the grade, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. So this piece probably about uncirculated, what Sheldon would have called about uncirculated, and given it a numeric grade of 50. Remember, this is a multiple of that basal state, so this piece would theoretically be worth about 50 times what that really, really worn example would be worth. So the next series, after about uncirculated, we go into uncirculated. And this gets a little bit tricky for people who are even familiar with coin collecting, certainly an area full of pitfalls for folks who are new to the hobby of coin collecting. There is not a ton of difference for most coin series between a numeric grade of 12, that would be the verbal grade of fine, and a grade of maybe 13 or 14. In fact, most coin collectors wouldn't be that specific about the numeric grade. Remember, Sheldon only used about 22 stopping points on that 1 to 70, so that train wouldn't stop at 13 or 14 most of the time. In modern coin collecting and modern coin grading, we might be a little bit more specific. We've gone to about 30, depending on who the grader is, 30 stops on that train ride. So there's not a lot of difference in value for most series between a 12 or a 13 or a 14. In fact, most numismatists, most graders wouldn't even be able to tell the difference between a 12 or a 13 or a 14. But when you start getting into very rare issues, these are very scarce issues, these are older issues, these may be pieces that they made very few of in the first place, the difference between one grade can have an enormous impact on the value and the scarcity of a coin. We might call that conditional scarcity or conditionally rare. And that really seems to impact those pieces once you get to that train stop at 60 and above. Anything that is 60 is considered an uncirculated piece. We might call that mint state with the designation of MS. So anything that is 60 and above is technically uncirculated. And this is where things get to be a little bit more tricky. I have here an example of an MS-60 coin. This small white holder is what we would call a slab in the industry. And this is a holder that is made from a company called Annex. They are a numismatic grading company, one of the oldest third-party graders. We will talk about third-party graders in the next video in the World of Coin Collecting series. But this coin grades a 60. And for those uninitiated, they might think, well, finally we've gotten to the uncirculated grades. A 60 must be a very high graded coin. Relatively speaking, on that scale of 1 to 70, 60 is pretty high. But in modern numismatics and modern coin collecting, 60s are somewhat considered a little bit of an unusual grade. This isn't a grade that we see very often. And for astute coin collectors, they know that grades of 60, 61, and 62 tend to be slightly problematic coins. It sounds like it's a high grade. You finally reach that threshold of uncirculated coins. But 60, 61, 62 tend to be pieces that have issues. They have a technical grade that is, in fact, 60 and above, but the coin may exhibit excess bag marks. We talked about those before, with those coins being lumped around and bumped around in those canvas sacks. They may have a few condition issues, maybe a few kind of scratches or even deep gouges here and there. So there is no evidence of wear on these coins. They don't have any evidence of friction on them, but their condition can still be impacted by things that they have come into contact with, often in the last 100, 200 years or more. Perhaps very light cleaning. Cleaning is something we'll talk about a little bit later. Perhaps just a little bit more bag marked than other pieces, maybe a few rim dings. The coin may have fallen on the ground at some point and picked up just a little bit of bumps on its edge here. But it's still technically uncirculated, so how do you grade it? You give it one of these kind of problematic gray area grades of 60 or 61. The real coin collectors tend to go for coins that are 63 and above. And the interesting thing here again is that uncirculated doesn't mean uncirculated. You could have pulled one of these coins out of circulation pretty quickly in its life. It may have gotten a little bit of circulation. It may have been spent for a few days or a few weeks even. But as long as there is no evidence of friction, no evidence of rub on those high points that we talked about, the coin would still be considered to be uncirculated, even though it could very easily have circulated. And again, that's one of those difficulties for folks who are new to the hobby of coin collecting to understand. Doesn't necessarily mean uncirculated. It's really a reference to the technical grade. You can see that the strike here around her ear is full. The cotton and tobacco leaves are fine. The fields are a little bit baggy. Do you see all these contact marks in the fields? This would lead me to believe that while this piece is probably uncirculated, has full cartwheel luster. You can see those bicycle spokes going around the outside of the rim as it moves through the light. Technically uncirculated, but it does have a fair amount of bag marks. So in my experience, I would say this is probably a 63, maybe a little bit nicer than some of those bag marked examples that we showed earlier. So at a point where the coin is a 63, old school collectors and dealers would have called this choice uncirculated. And they start adding on these superlatives that we talked about at the beginning of the video to try to make the coin sound maybe a little bit more enticing. So it's not just uncirculated, it's choice uncirculated. You know, if you guys were sitting around your gentleman's club again, smoking a cigar and drinking your brandy, and you had 3 or 4 coins in front of you, it's clear to see that some of those are genuinely uncirculated. But what do you do if one of those pieces is just a little bit nicer than the other one? Objective versus subjective, but you can tell that this piece maybe has a few more bag marks on it than this piece or this piece. That's applying these ideas of superlative. Both of them or all of them still uncirculated, one a little bit nicer than the next. So a 63, we would call that choice uncirculated. And then a little bit later, the 64 started being used. So again, we're at 61, 62, 63, 64, 65, and I have here an example of an MS65 Morgan. Look at the flash and brilliance on this piece. You can really start to appreciate that there is a difference between one uncirculated Morgan dollar and another uncirculated Morgan dollar. So which would you rather have? You're applying that subjectivity to it, but one is definitely nicer than the other. This is uncirculated, but this is a 66 in terms of Sheldon scale. This is very high up on the scale for a Morgan dollar. We don't typically see Morgans 67 or 68, and in fact there are very few, if any, 69 original Morgan dollars out there. Mint state 69 is an almost theoretical grade, and 70 would definitely be a theoretical grade on the scale of 1 to 70 for the Morgan dollars. 63 is choice uncirculated, so what would we call a 65 or a 66? Well, we came up with the idea of calling that a gem choice uncirculated. This would be a gem uncirculated Morgan dollar because it is so much nicer than a 63. And then you could go with superb gem uncirculated at 67 and 68. And if the word was going to be applied to the Morgan dollars, you might call it a perfect 70. Again, there are no 70s to my knowledge that have ever been graded by a reputable third-party grader, so that's really almost a theoretical grade. So there we have it. The Sheldon scale. It was really designed as a way for Sheldon to codify the multiples of value for his pieces that he was trying to attribute for these early large cents. But it made sense. It was kind of a logical system. As much as I would like the scale to be a 1 to 100, so it would be kind of making sense in that metric cent type scale, the 1 to 100 scale, 1 to 70 stuck. He wrote about it at length. People adopted the scale not just for the large cents that Sheldon had originally codified and studied himself, and it became the standard throughout Western coin collecting. The 1 to 70 scale is still in use today. And you can see that it has some benefits if you're talking about a numeric grade. And once you've been in the hobby for a period of time, you even start dropping those verbal grades. You don't talk about something being extremely fine or about uncirculated. You just simply say it's a 55 or a 53 or a 58. So the Sheldon scale, simple if you understand kind of how it works. And the nice thing about the Sheldon scale is that depending on what your focus is on the hobby, you don't even really care about most of this. If you are a beginning stacker, say that you are just interested in silver dollars because of their silver value, you would probably be looking at Morgan dollars in the lower scale, so somewhere in maybe this range. And you don't need to know a whole lot about the pieces that are over here in this side of this continuum. They don't really impact you. Now, if you're able to acquire some of these pieces that are clearly a much higher grade and they're not going to cost you any more than this, then you would probably pick these pieces up. We would call that a subjective choice. These look better to you, so why not grab these? They may even have a little tiny bit more silver in them. So if you can get these for the same price as these, of course you'll pick them up. But for the most part, you're probably worried about the pieces in this group. If you are a mid-level collector, you've made that cross over that bridge from stacking to collecting, or you're new to collecting and you're enjoying the hobby, but you don't have a very deep budget, you might concentrate on these pieces here in the middle. So you would learn the difference between pieces that are very good and extremely fine, perhaps somewhere in this field, somewhere between numeric grades of about 10 to about 30 or 40. And those would be the pieces that you would really focus on. There's no reason for you to look at these pieces because you don't want pieces that are almost indiscernible. You don't want pieces that you don't know anything about. And you probably don't have the budget for these pieces. Again, if you're able to find these pieces in that same price range that you're looking at for those folks, then you would probably pick them up. But that really wouldn't be your focus. You don't need to know the entire Sheldon scale. And finally, if you are an advanced collector, and if you're really trying to assemble a collection that has the very finest pieces you can get, you would probably only focus on these pieces. In fact, you might only focus on these pieces, those pieces that grade from 60 to 70. Those would be your area of focus. You would have no interest in these pieces. You would have absolutely no interest in these pieces. They don't have any appeal to you. So you can see how even though the Sheldon scale, a scale of 1 to 70, theoretically only 22 of those numbers that Sheldon used, or as modern coin collectors use, maybe more like 30 or even 35 of those numbers. Most people within their segment of the hobby or the stacking would only use kind of a small segment of these pieces, a small segment of those grades. 60 to 70 would be kind of the focus of those higher end coin collectors. Let's talk a little bit about some of the other things that come into play when you are a coin collector and you are new to the idea of grades. And I wanted to touch briefly on the concept of the difference between a proof and a business strike. These pieces you see here before you, all of these pieces up here are all business strikes. That's what the Red Book would call them. That's what the Mint would call them. That's what collectors would call them. These are pieces that were meant for business, for trade. Pieces that you would have found in circulation when they were actually released are called business strikes. Now, there are certain coins that are made specifically for collectors that are called proofs. What's the difference between a business strike and a proof? A business strike is designed for circulation, or at least struck as if it is to be used for circulation. A proof, though, is a manufacturing process. It's not a grade. These coins up here will never be proof coins. They can never be in such a state of preservation that you would call them a proof. Confusing, you may call them proof-like if they were struck with really highly polished dies. And Morgan dollars are famous for this. You can see the cameo effect here, how those fields almost appear black compared to Liberty's face looking white. We would call that a bit of a cameo. This isn't a true cameo, but you kind of get the idea how that black and white cameo effect works. And we would call that sometimes, if the cameo was really distinct, we would call that proof-like. But it's still never going to be an actual proof coin, because proof is a manufacturing process. It's not a grade. I have examples here of a modern silver eagle. So this piece here is an uncirculated silver eagle. This would probably grade 64, 65, maybe a little bit higher than that. I tend to be kind of conservative with my grades. But this is an example of a typical silver eagle. You can see how the fields are kind of a washed matte finish. They're a little bit low luster. There's nothing that's really special about this. It's not popping, even compared to the Morgan dollar 100 years earlier. It has kind of almost a matte uncirculated finish. This is what the Mint intended these to look like. This is probably, like I said, 64, 65. It's definitely uncirculated, clearly never been spent, but it is also in such a state of preservation that I would be comfortable with a 64, 65 grade on this. This is a proof of the same series. You can see that dramatic black and white cameo. That's because this coin was prepared with a specially prepared planchet being the blank coin as it's placed into the dies at the Mint, and then struck with heavily polished dies under very specific circumstances, often incredibly high pressures, to really bring out the design elements. And this is a proof. It is designed specifically for collectors. It usually comes in a much more fancy box than the basic Silver Eagles or any other series that you're talking about. So proof is not really a condition. It's a manufacturing process, and a business strike coin will never be a proof. However, sometimes proofs make their way into circulation. A collection that's found by somebody who doesn't understand coins, dump them into the Coinstar. Sometimes there are modern proof pieces that have very little value, and when they are sold back to the dealers simply cut them out of their packages and deposit them in the bank. Those pieces tend to get bag marks. They tend to get wear. There's some friction on them. And we would call those impaired proofs. So a proof can be spent, and consequently its grade can go down. And I've seen examples of very, very rare proof coins with a grade of proof 3 or proof 5 compared to a typical proof coin like this, which would probably be a proof 69, proof 70. Modern proofs, very high grades, usually in very nice holders, direct from the mint, no chance of them ever coming to contact with any other coins, no bag marks, usually nothing that would diminish that grade. So they stay up there in that 68, 69, 70 grade. And that's kind of what we expect from modern proof coins. A difference, manufacturing process versus a business coin. Proof and business strike are not conditions, they are manufacturing differences. And we talked about, at the beginning of this video, superlatives, and I wanted to touch on them very basically in kind of a broad overview. Some of the superlatives that have come about with the idea of third-party grading, and again, these coin holders are very specific to third-party graders who will grade your coin for a fee, and they have no vested interest in it. They will just offer their opinion about what the grade is on that coin. Sometimes the coin is so nice that they will apply superlatives to it. NGC, which this is an example of, has a star designation, and they also have a plus designation. So a star designation is a coin that has exceptional eye appeal. I believe that this is actually a candidate for a star, and it probably should have gotten one, but I'm not going to complain too much about it. A plus designation, which you would see up here next to the grade, a star or a plus. A plus is a designation that the coin is very close to the next condition level. So if this had a plus designation on it, NGC would have said, wow, this just barely missed an MS67 grade, so we're going to give it a plus. You start to see the differences between even Sheldon's numbers. It's a 66.7 or a 66.8. NGC has decided to give it a denotation, a superlative of a plus. And a coin can actually be both. It can have exceptional eye appeal and be very close to the next grade, the next numeric grade. So a coin could theoretically have both a plus and a star. I've never seen one myself, but I have seen images, and it's an interesting idea, a plus and star. PCGS uses a plus for exceptional eye appeal and applies that to about the top 30% of the coins in a grade. There are other superlatives that have been used for a very long time within coin collecting. Fine style is one that's often used in ancient coins, and it simply means that the coin has a superior style. It was designed by a mentor whose name unfortunately has been lost to time, but who was an expert in his craft, and the coins that were produced with the dies that they carved are excellent. We would call that fine style. You don't see it too often on modern pieces, but you do see it on ancient coins. Another one that is a little bit more esoteric and doesn't seem to be used very much anymore is the French expression fleur de coin, or the flower of the die, the bloom of the die. And it means that a coin that is so exceptional that you can still see the mint bloom and luster. Again, I'll go to the 66 example to show what that luster could look like. If this was even more lustrous and more beautiful, this might be considered fleur de coin. Flower of the coin, flower of the press. You don't see it very often anymore. There are also superlatives for strike characteristics. And a strike characteristic can be something like a Franklin half dollar, and I'll show an example of it here, with a full bell line. The lower lines in the bell were struck with a brand new die at the right pressure so that they brought up the relief of these very small lines at the very bottom of the bell. Collectors look for that. Remember, this is that objective or subjective expression. If you have a choice between pieces that are kind of poorly struck or a piece that is very well struck so that you can see all the detail very sharply, an astute collector is going to go for that piece that has that really sharp detail. The question is, do you go for a piece that has really sharp detail and a few more bag marks or contact marks? Or do you go for the lesser example, maybe not quite as well struck, that has fewer back marks and really nice clean surfaces? That's the tricky part, and that's where subjectivity really comes into. It really depends on what you are after. Remember, this is always going to be your journey, and you need to decide what you're comfortable with. Jefferson nickels can have 5 or 6 step designations, those superlatives, and that simply means on the back monument there you can see the steps of Monticello. The steps, if they are very well defined, can be 5 or 6 steps. This is an example of another strike superlative. FB on the mercury dime stands for full bands. If you're looking at the faces on the back of the mercury dime, the torch, if you've got the definition of these lines between these bands, that means this coin was struck with the correct pressure in the right circumstances with a brand new die, and it really brought out the detail, so much so that you can see the full bands on the back piece. And I'll show an example of what I'm talking about here. There are also pieces that have sometimes the SP designation, and it depends on who you're asking. That really means a special proof. Some people might call this a specimen, and it kind of means the same thing. This is a coin that's maybe not quite a proof, but is not quite a business strike. So it's really almost a manufacturing process, but the specimen has the characteristics of a business strike, but that business strike has been so carefully manufactured that it's almost a proof. So that specimen can be kind of a bridge between the two. An interesting area of collecting, another superlative, that SP. And I know we pile on these superlatives to the point where they get to be somewhat confusing. Just know that they are out there, and you can always look them up and find out what they mean. And in fact, that can be an exciting part of the hobby. Some designations that are different from kind of the actual manufacturing process, we'll just go over a few more of those. We talked about proof like before. When a business strike has those mirrored fields, we would say that that's kind of a proof like. In copper coins, and I'll show some examples here. In fact, if you were looking at being a young coin collector, you may have a folder like this. As an advanced coin collector, I even have a folder like this, and this is my folder. You can see how bright coppery orange these scents are. I make a practice of taking my coins out of my pocket at night, and I pocket and I save all of the pieces that are copper. The United States stopped using full copper coins in 1982, so anything dated 81 and earlier, I set aside. And when I'm setting them aside, am I checking those dates to make sure that the coin is a copper coin versus a modern zinc cent? I look at the dates, and if I find a piece that is in an exceptional condition, again, that subjectivity, I flip open my folder that I keep next to my jar of pennies. And if that date is a better condition than one of the pieces that I've already set aside, I will pop that into my folder. And over the last 10 or 15 years, I've almost completed this collection of modern Lincoln cents. But you can see that some of these have a brilliant coppery color to them, like this example of this 1959. Brilliant copper example, some of the pieces a little bit more darker. So this piece may get a designation from some of the grading services as RD, meaning red. That copper is so bright that we might consider it almost red. Some of the ones that are a little bit less bright, we might consider to be red-brown or RB. And then some of the pieces that are really quite dark, we would consider them to be brown copper. So you've got a red-brown, and a brown copper designation for some of those other superlatives on copper coins only. Cameo, we talked a little bit about cameo. That's that black and white contrast. On NGC, they have proof coins, they have proof cameo coins, and they have proof ultra cameo. And it just depends on how amazingly different that black and white cameo is and how deeply you can see reflections in that going all the way back. So those superlatives for proofs on NGC pieces, proof cameo, and proof ultra cameo. PCGS does essentially the same thing. NGC, PCGS, the two top-tier third-party graders. Again, we'll talk about third-party graders in an upcoming edition of the World of Coin Collecting. PCGS calls them proof, cameo, and deep cameo, sometimes referred to as DCAM. Again, coin collectors are notorious for shortening words, so DCAM. These are all the superlatives that are attached to coin collecting, but those are really kind of in addition to the coin grade. The coin grade is what you're really looking forward first. And as we said before, the coin grade is simply a scale of 1 to 70. How many different train stops or bus stops are there on that 1 to 70 grade? You can easily see the difference between a coin that's maybe a 1 and a coin that's maybe a 62, 63. It's definitely discernible with the naked eye. And when you really start paying attention to those high points, those points of wear, the points where the friction is going to be the most obvious, it really starts to be kind of understandable. You dispel some of the how am I ever going to learn all of this and realize that you're probably really only going to be concerned with certain small segments of this coin grading scale. There's no reason to panic about it. There are lots of other resources out there, not just this video, but you can pick up a copy of the Red Book, and the Red Book will walk you through how to grade pieces pretty easily. PCGS and NGC both have kind of grading tutorials, so you can see the grading scale that they use. Not every third-party grader is exactly the same when it comes to grading. They tend to be quite close. NGC, PCGS, the two that are considered to be kind of the most conservative when it comes to grading. And again, we'll definitely talk about the pitfalls and dangers of third-party grading in an upcoming edition of the World of Coin Collecting. I mentioned cleaning a little bit earlier in the video, and I just wanted to go over that one more time. A lot of people who are new to the hobby might misunderstand the concept of cleaning. Generally speaking, in numismatics and coin collecting, we never clean coins. That should be the cardinal rule that everybody kind of takes away from this. There are very rare exceptions, and those exceptions are so few and far between that I hesitate to even really talk about them. We're not going to talk about them in this video anyway, but I wanted to give an example of a coin that has been cleaned so you can kind of see what I'm talking about here. This a Morgan dollar, the grade on this one probably would have been that numeric grade somewhere around an 8. You can see that the date is still there. You can see that it's legible, 1878. The luster on this coin, this is not the best example, but I tend to avoid clean coins, so it's going to be the best example that I can offer you. There is no cartwheel on this piece. This coin has been cleaned to the point where all of the luster has been stripped off of it. All of the originality of this coin has been stripped. There are examples of clean coins that look so brilliantly white that they're almost comical. And that's what happens when you clean a coin. You strip away the cartwheel luster of the coin to the point where it's just kind of a dull finish. And a lot of people who are new to the hobby, new to stacking, new to coin collecting, might assume that cleaning a coin increases the grade, improves the grade. That is simply not true. Coin collectors can tell instantly when a coin has been cleaned, and we avoid them almost always, with very, very few exceptions. If a coin is incredibly scarce, incredibly rare, a lot of the third-party graders won't grade them, or will do something we call details grading. Well, they'll say, this coin would have graded an 8 or a 10 were it not for cleaning. But because it's been cleaned, we can't even offer a numerical grade on it, so we're going to offer a details grade. Cleaning coins destroys the coin. We see ourselves as purveyors of coins. We see ourselves as protectors of coins. Coin collectors see themselves as custodians, the ones who are in charge of these coins while they are in our possession. And generally speaking, in almost all circumstances, we don't clean coins. Doesn't matter what process you've heard is the best process, what process is the easiest on the coin. We don't clean coins. We can tell when a coin has been cleaned from a mile away. And if you're going to clean a coin, in almost all circumstances, no matter what you've heard by anybody else online or in any other videos on YouTube, a clean coin is essentially a ruined coin, and no collector is going to want it. Do you have the right to clean your coins? Of course. They're in your possession. If you paid for them, you have the right to do with them what you will. But coin collectors avoid clean coins under almost all circumstances, and we can always tell when a coin has been cleaned, and we avoid them. So when it comes to cleaning coins, it doesn't matter how dark the coin is. It doesn't matter if you think that you can somehow improve the coin because it's so dark. By cleaning the coin, especially with anything harsh at all, but in essentially any other type of cleaning that you can do to a coin, you are going to decrease its value, not increase its value. You are going to decrease its grade, and you are going to dramatically decrease its collectability. My strong advice, White Cross's advice, under no circumstances ever do you clean a coin. NGC recently, is just a quick aside, has recently announced something called NGCX. And just to make this a little bit more confusing, they've thrown away the Sheldon scale of 1 to 70 and they've implemented a 10-point grading scale. Now, each one of those points has fractions to them. So it could be a 9.6, a 9.8. So it's not really a 10-point scale. But NGCX was kind of designed to move coins into the same direction that collectors of comic books and sports card and trading cards have been using for a while. So those pieces are typically graded on a scale of 1 to 10. And then you've got little decimal points along the way to discern pieces that are of higher quality than the pieces immediately below them. NGCX, it's an interesting idea. I'm not really a fan of it myself. I know that the Sheldon scale of 1 to 70 seems a little bit cumbersome, especially if you're new to the idea, the concept of coin grading. But spend some time with it. It actually starts to make sense and you start to really get comfortable with it. And then why would you want to change to a system that is maybe not quite as comprehensive as the Sheldon scale is? Coin grading. It's really not that difficult, but it can benefit you. If you find yourself in a position where you're looking at certain coins, obviously use your subjective opinion. Go with a piece that really has the eye appeal that you're looking for, but don't be afraid to start grading coins on your own. Look for those high points, look for those points of friction, look for bag marks. And once you start to realize that if you're being offered pieces at the same price, taking your loop along with you, your eyepiece along with you, and spending a few moments to decide which piece has the best eye appeal, but which one also has the least amount of wear, the fewest number of bag marks, you're a coin grader. You've automatically become a coin grader, and this is how it can really help you make your collection more interesting, ultimately potentially make your collection more valuable, more easy to sell when you get to the point where you want to go for the exit. Coin grading is really not that difficult once you get a little bit familiar with it. Hopefully you've become a little bit more comfortable with it by watching this video, and I appreciate the time you spent with me here today. If you have any questions about the pieces that we talked about here today, by all means, leave a comment down below and I'll try to address it. If you have thoughts about another series that you'd like to see in the world of coin collecting video series, or any other video series that we can make for you, leave a comment down below and I'll see if we've got the expertise and the examples to make that a possibility. And as always, thank you for allowing me to be a part of your journey as you go deeper into the world of coins and physical precious metals.